In this video, I'm going to tackle the single most powerful way to tackle your anxiety so that you can clear your mind, feel less stressed, get more done, and feel happier. So keep watching unless, you enjoy being anxious. So anxiety is a completely normal human emotion that's characterized by feelings of fear, dread, or general uneasiness. And sometimes that can manifest itself through physical manifestations like increased sweating or increased heart rate. I think it's important to note at this point that there's a difference between normal anxiety and actual anxiety disorders. So the World Health Organization believes that about 4% of the global population suffers from anxiety disorders, which is an inordinately high level of anxiety. So that's anxiety that is continuous, pervasive, and greater than what you would normally expect, and that prevents you from functioning. If you believe you have an anxiety disorder, then in that case, you should be looking to seek specialized help. And please, for the love of God, don't listen to anyone on YouTube unless what they're telling you to do is to seek specialized help. But for everyone else who's dealing with sort of normal levels of anxiety, the solutions that we're about to talk about in this video can seriously help you reduce that level so that you can get more stuff done. I know at least it's worked for me. So this great quote, often attributed to Lao Tzu, which is, if you're feeling depressed, you're living in the past. If you're feeling anxious, you're living in the future. And if you're at peace, you're living in the present. Now, whether or not Lao Tzu actually ever said that is kind of besides the point, and whether or not modern psychologists would actually agree with that definition of anxiety, also a little bit beside the point, because at the very least, it gives us a conceptual framework around which to kind of understand what anxiety is. And what we learned from that quote is essentially, if we want to get rid of anxiety, well, all we need to do is stop thinking about the future. So just stop thinking about the future. Poof, done. We're okay. That's it. That's the end of the video. See you guys later. Okay, I'm joking. Obviously, that's not the end of the video because just stopping thinking about the future is just not that simple. So we need to figure out how we can actually do that. Practically speaking, there is a very long-standing and very concrete way to get thoughts of the future out of your head and really just to clear your mind in general. This process goes back about 8,000 years. And essentially what we're talking about here is writing things down. So getting things out of your head and putting them onto a piece of paper. The benefit of writing things down is really quite clear. It's the idea of you take all the thoughts that are bouncing around in your head and you get them external. You put them on a piece of paper, or if you're on your phone, in a note on your phone, or if you're on a computer, in a Word document, or whatever you want to do. Essentially, what you're doing is you're just taking all of the thoughts that are bouncing around in your head and you're getting them external. And if you can convince yourself that now all of the thoughts that were bouncing around in your head now live in a place that is not your head, you can now focus your attention on something else, something that is more important, something that is in the present, and you're not going to be distracted by these future thoughts. So it sounds simple, right? But how do you actually go about doing this? Now, one of the challenges that is particular to the time period in which we live is that for millennia, if people wanted to accomplish this task, they really only had one option, right? And that was to write down what is in their head on a piece of paper, or I guess if we go back far enough, stone tablet or papyrus. But for most of human history, it's been about writing things down on a piece of paper. But in the 21st century, we have so many options for how to get things out of our head that in some ways, that overwhelm of where to put thoughts is even greater than the problem of having those thoughts in the first place. So I'm going to run through just a couple of ways that you can do this that can work for you. None of these are meant to be exhaustive. They're just meant to be examples to give you some inspiration of how you can get this stuff out of your head, because once it's out of your head, now you can finally start to be more productive and feel less anxious. Now, one of the methods that you can use for capturing thoughts is the good old-fashioned analog system. And to use an analog system to capture your thoughts, really, you just need two things. You need some sort of pocket notebook. These are a couple of examples of ones that I've used in the past. The actual type you use doesn't really matter, and you need some sort of pen. That's it, a pen and a pocket notebook. You can use a pencil too, whatever works for you. Now, at this point, a lot of people, especially people who watch videos about this type of stuff on YouTube, tend to go down a rabbit hole of what is the ideal notebook for this purpose? What is the ideal pen for this purpose? I know because I've been that person. I'll tell you what I've used in the past, but by no means do you need to go out and buy those things in order for this to work. So these specific notebooks here are both of these are Moleskine notebooks. They're the pocket size notebooks. They're both One is a Cahiers style, and the other one is, I think it's a Volant. Doesn't really matter. I've also used dollar store notepads for this purpose. I've also used other brand notebooks. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because the goal here isn't to have something pretty. Same thing for the pen. The pen that I generally tend to carry with me is the Fisher Space Pen, which has become famous thanks to Seinfeld. It can write in space. I've never been to space. I don't actually need a Fisher Space Pen. I like the Fisher Space Pen because A, it's tiny and fits in my pocket easily because I don't generally tend to carry a bag with me. And because of the fact that it's pressurized, I can write up against a wall or I can write upside down. Basically, I never have any issues writing. That being said, if I don't have a space pen with me, a plain old Bic Crystal, which costs something like 10 cents, will get the job done 99% as well. So is the Fisher Space Pen actually worth 300 times more than the Bic Crystal pen? Nope, absolutely not. So just use whatever you have lying around and don't get bogged down in the specific tools. What's important here is the method of just capturing your thoughts and getting them down on a piece of paper. Now, obviously, the second method that you can use to capture your thoughts, aside from an analog method, is a more digital method. And when it comes to digital methods, there are so many tools that I could probably make 100 videos and never get to the end of all the tools that exist right now. And by the time I was done making videos, I'd have to make another 50 more just to cover the things that came out during the time I was making those videos. So I'm not going to try and go through all the tools. I'll tell you the digital capture method that I have used. And for me, that has been nothing but a fully Apple ecosystem. And so I use an iPhone, I use a MacBook, and I also have an iPad, which I almost never use. But between the iPhone and the MacBook, that is pretty much my entire digital capture system. And the reason the Apple ecosystem works so well is because if you have an iPhone or if you have an Apple Watch, you can just say, hey, S, and if you're on the Apple ecosystem, you know who S is, and say, remind me to do XYZ. The moment you do that, Siri is going to grab what you just said, and she will put it into your reminders app in the default task list. So it's as simple as that. And once you've done that, now you can capture every single stray thought that is in your mind, and it syncs across all of your different devices. So you don't need to worry about copying it from one place to the other. Okay, now that we've talked about some basic ideas of tools, how do you actually use them? Because like I said at the beginning, it's not about the tools, it's about the process. And the process here is great. Now I have these things that I'm carrying around with me that I can use to capture my thoughts. What exactly do I do with them? How do I use them? Well, it's simple. Every time something comes up in your mind that is something that you think you're going to have to remember to take action on at a later date, or just a thought that is kind of bouncing around that is kind of bothering you for whatever reason, you're going to jot it down into your capture system. So you're going to pull out your notebook and you're going to write it down. Okay, so whatever those thoughts are, that is what you're going to do. And the only way that this really works, though, is if once you've jotted it down, you take some time at a later time, that could be later in the evening or at the end of the week, to go back through the list of things you captured and review them and say, hey, this is something that I actually do need to get done. And if it's something that's short and quick to get done, just get it done right there and then on the spot. If it's something that you need to plan some time for, put some time in your calendar to get it done in the future. If it's something where you look at it with the benefit of a few hours of hindsight and you say, this really isn't that important. Why did I think of this in the first place? Then you get to do the best thing ever, which is just delete it, cross it out, and don't do anything with it. There's no more satisfying feeling than being able to strike out a thought that was bothering you and realizing you don't actually have to do anything with it. So the goal here is just capture these things, put them into a system, and then at some point review them and decide what you want to do with them. And I'll talk a little bit more in a later video about what those systems could potentially look like. But for now, really your only goal is to get stuff out of your brain and onto some sort of external storage device. And when I say device, I'm using that super broadly because I'm calling this a device, right? That's all well and good, but what about those thoughts that are a little bit more complex? Not everything that you think of during the day is a simple task that you can just jot down in point form, right? So for those things, for those larger worries, I would say, that's where you can take up another practice that has been around forever, and that is the practice of journaling. Journaling right now is going through something of a renaissance. I seem to recall that when I was younger, journaling was something that teenage girls did in their diary, locked up in their bedrooms, and no one was allowed to read those. Somehow that has turned into a practice that is being used by CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. So we've gone from the teenage girl's bedroom to the boardroom. All the better. That's just fantastic. If it is actually helpful, that's what matters, right? So the practice of journaling, all that we're really doing when we're journaling is we're saying, here are the thoughts that are in my mind that are bugging me, and we're putting them down on the page. And there is no specific structure for this. There are going to be apps that will say that they can do this for you. There's going to be journals that you can buy that give you prompts to do this every day. None of that really matters. The only thing you're really trying to do is to get everything in your head onto a page. Again, I don't care if it's a paper page or a digital page, just get it out onto the page. The difference between the journaling practice and the capture practice of things that could be more like tasks is that whereas when you're capturing things that you need to get done in your notebook or in your reminders app or in your tasks app or whatever, you need a review to go back through that list of things and say, okay, what am I going to do with this? When you're journaling, you actually don't really need to review this stuff. Yes, you can go back look at your journals and say, oh, this is the stuff that I was thinking about, and this is how I've thought about it since then, and see how your thinking has evolved. Or you could take some time and reflect on it a little bit more. All of those things are wonderful practices, but the real benefit of journaling isn't in the reviewing, it's in the actual act of journaling where you are getting the stuff out of your head and onto the page, because it creates a form of mental catharsis. And that's what allows you to feel like your brain is at rest, like your mind is at peace, that you're no longer jumping all over the place. Getting everything onto the page, even if you never look at that page ever again. I personally have used the practice of journaling on and off for probably over 20 years. And I know for a fact that there are journal entries that I have written down that I have never reread, because again, that's not the point. The point is just to say, if there's something that's bugging me, let me put it down on a page, and you'd be surprised by how quickly after writing something down, you feel a weight lifted off your shoulders. You feel like you don't need to worry about this thing anymore because it exists in a place that is separate from you. And if I ever want to come back to it, I can, but I don't have to. That alone is enough to help you clear your mind. But now that I've talked about both of these things, the next step here is really, really crucial, because before you finish watching this video, what I want you to do is I want you to commit to putting this in practice for the next 2 days. That's all I'm asking you. Start with 2 days. So for the next 2 days before this video ends, right now, decide for yourself, how are you going to capture your thoughts? Are you going to use an app? Are you going to use a notepad? Are you going to use, a command on your watch? Anything. Just make that decision right now. Go. Okay, you've made that decision. Now I want you to commit for the next 2 days that every single stray thought that comes into your mind, I want you to jot it down. And then after the 2 days are over, what I want you to do is I want you to go through that list of things that you've created over that period of 2 days and decide what you're going to do with them. Are you going to take action on them right away? Are you going to put them on a to-do list? Are you going to schedule them on your calendar for a later day? Or are you going to say, you know what, I didn't need to be worrying about this. I'm just going to cross it off. That is all I want you to do for the next 2 days. But I guarantee you that if you actually do this at the end of these 2 days, you will feel like, wow, this is something that is actually helping me reduce my anxiety. It's making me feel like I have a clearer headspace and I can get more done because I'm not distracted by all these other thoughts. That's all I'm asking. Can you do that? 2 days. That's it. If you found this video helpful, then maybe you'll also appreciate this other video that I created about how to be more productive. Or if you really liked what you saw, subscribe to the channel, because I'm creating more content like this about ways that you can feel more productive and just other lessons in general that you probably should have learned in school but didn't. Until next time, cheers.